You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria, the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Before we kick off our conversation on more issues arising from the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill, let's listen into this background put together by Joseph Utsen.
The Petroleum Industry Bill, PIB, is harmonized by the National Assembly and passed, and it is awaiting the President's assent. Among the major areas of interest to most analysts is the unbundling and commercialization of the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, as well as scrapping of the Petroleum Equalization Fund, PEF, and Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency, PPPRA. With this, the NNPC is to be replaced with NNPC Limited as an operator and ceases to be the regulatory authority.
NNPC, as currently is, belongs to the Federation and not to the federal government. It's owned, as it were, by the Federation. And that's why we talk about NNPC is not able to contribute, or is, I'm strong with respect to, remittances for sharing at FAC. So that ownership of NNPC Limited is a point that needs to be resolved between the federal and the state governments.
With NNPC losing its regulatory powers, a stronger regulatory framework is needed for effective service delivery. This means that each sector of the industry will have separate regulatory bodies.
A regulator has to have resources, monetary resources, and all the resources that it needs. It cannot be dependent on, it can't be dependent on the people it's regulating, the entities it is regulating.
But with this framework, be thorough enough to tackle issues of accountability and transparency, which analysts say were lacking under the leadership of NNPC, where and what could be greater concern for the new regulatory regime in streamlining functions for the sustainable development in the oil and gas industry. Guests on Good Morning Nigeria are well ready to provide answers and share perspectives on other matters arising from the passage of the PIB.
Now, joining us via Zoom this morning for our conversation is a professor of energy and electricity, Law University of Lagos, Professor Yemi Oke. Prof, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigeria. Thanks for having me.
And here in our Abuja studio, we have Engineer Mohammed Sidi Sada, former Director on Legal Meteorology, Federal Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment.
Good morning, Nigerians, and thank you for having me.
All right, let's begin the conversation with Professor Yemi Oke, who is with us via Zoom. Professor Yemi Oke, incidentally, we've had you over the years as a guest on Good Morning Nigeria discussing oil and gas issues with particular focus on the Petroleum Industry Bill, which has been indicated, had a long odyssey in the National Assembly before its eventual passage last week. But still, there are issues arising from the passage of the PIB by the two chambers of the National Assembly. But from your own perspective, what is heartwarming about the PIB at this stage before we start getting into the contentious areas?
Thank you very much for that question. The passage of the PIB is a welcome development, but is that the kind of legislation that will advance the petroleum sector in Nigeria? I'm not quite sure. And as much as it's been a long waiting for Nigerians, but the Petroleum Industry Act that we are about to have, it might consider the opinion, will appear to me to be a piece of legislation that might create more problems than intended, those intended to be solved. Of course, even in your analysis, some of the issues have been mentioned. The subtle monopoly is one. The reactions of state government as to the equalization fund, the unbundling, and so many other issues that have been raised by Nigerians, myself inclusive, are those that probably will make us have a kind of rethink. We are not being pessimistic, but then I'm not sure. In as much as we don't expect a perfect bill, no law is perfect. A lot will still depend on how those laws are operationalized. But the petroleum industry bill as passed still leave much to be desired in terms of what Nigerians have been expecting or after a long period of waiting for the bill.
Well, Professor Emioke, we'll get back to you because we've not had the heartwarming aspects of this PIB as Kingsley wanted to get. Perhaps in the course of the program, we'll get back to you because there must be areas that, of course, you consider perfect in a way, because this bill has been protracted for a very long time at the National Assembly. They have been deliberating on this matter for quite some years, and today that the bill has been passed, we seem to be rejoicing that after all said and done, that bill has been passed. But let's turn to Engineer Mohammed Sidi Sada to get his own perspective of what the bill has been able to address.
Well, thank you very much. After having a very close look at the content of the bill and vis-a-vis the other things to be considered when it comes to regulatory framework in the country, we believe that there are some sections in the bill. We cannot really cancel all the sections in the bill. Definitely there are some areas that the bill can be applauded, but there are some sections in the bill, particularly that has some negative effect on a department in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment known as Weights and Measures, and indeed the ministry itself, that have been undermined to their functions being seen to be usurped by the bill, that outrightly, without any recognition of the fact that it had been in the field since during colonial era, and there are so many other functions that the department is doing to really regulate the weighing and measuring businesses in all sectors of the economy. Why should oil and gas be a different item to be, even considering it's important in Nigeria? So if I may borrow the word of the professor that last spoken, the intent of monopoly is clearly seen and demonstrated by some sections that even came out clearly to downplay the role the Weights and Measures and indeed the Ministry of Industry and Investment is playing in the sector, in the industry. So, which is more or less an internationally observed or accepted kind of participation in anything trade in Nigeria. This ministry had the mandate of ensuring it is done and done well for the benefits to be accrued to the federal government, for all the revenues to be accountable. You understand that it's coming from this important commodity. So I see no reason why such important
Engineer Mohammed Sada,
yes.
I would like you to be more explicit to our viewers. I understand what you're talking about.
Yes.
I wouldn't know whether my colleague and I were on set on that occasion.
Okay.
There was a news report sometime last week that the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Investment was, as it were, grumbling that some functions had been excised.
Yes.
That's to say, issues relating to weights and measures for the oil and gas industry are now assigned to the regulatory authority. There are supposed to be two supervising authorities there. You have one a commission and then the other one an authority. So what exactly, give our viewers an indication of what the grouse is by MITI, that's to say the Industry, Trade and Investment, in terms of the excision of weights and measures from its many functions and now assigning it under the PIB to the regulatory authority of the oil and gas industry.
Well, that may take me to the necessity of maybe going through some of the sections that we are actually agitating about, and thereby bring you to the fact that these sections are really offensive to what has already been on ground. Like, this is one of the sections that is saying any government ministry, department or agency exercising any power or functions or taking any action which may have direct impact on upstream petroleum operations shall consult with the Commission, issuing any regulatory guidelines, enforcement, and that means the ministry. You can look at the status of a ministry that has no power to actually carry out its functions without going back and seeking permission from the said commission, which is quite abnormal. When you look at another section that that talks directly, it even went ahead to talk directly. It says, issuance of certificates of quality and quantity, which the Weights and Measures Department is actually looking at in every sector, not only limited to oil and gas, mind you, to exporters of crude oil, natural gases, and petroleum products from integrated operations. I don't know what they need to meet with. And crude oil export terminal established period to the effective date, that means of the establishment of this commission. The commission shall have the power to monitor and regulate the operation of crude oil export terminal, and the responsibilities, it is very clearly quoted, of weights and measures at crude oil terminals shall cease to exist.
Yes, so that's a drafting technique. It's a drafting technique by way of overriding previous duties assigned to, say, the MITI with regard to weights and measures.
But how can it be justified?
The justification is there in the several provisions you have. In the creation of a new commission, I'm not a member of the legislature.
Yes.
But I'm saying, look, what is the intendment of this whole argument to say, oh, weights and measures should still be retained in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment? What is the rationale for it? For the argument you are making against what has been provided for in the PIB as passed?
You see, Nigeria is not alone in the Committee of Nations. These activities of this department is recognized internationally. Other countries are operating it. Why should we be a different sector altogether? We are signatories to a number of agreements and treaties in respect of these activities we are carried out. We are a member of Organization of International Legal Metrology, which is it is an international body, which we are a member. The very fact that you downplay us in carrying out such duties, that means you cease to be a member. All what you are going to maybe attain will now be looked, and then there will be suspicious of kind of intolerance in terms of this. So why should we accept that for somebody to say?
I'm just wondering because
let's bring in
before we bring in another guest, let's just probably dispense with this issue, or we can come back to it. The PIB provision does not mean that all other functions relating to weights and measures, other than those in the oil and gas industry, have now been taken away from the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. I imagine that MITI should have its hands full. There are several other sectors where you should be concerned. We're talking about, even let's say the things that you and I see regularly. You know, is it iron and steel? If you're telling you something is 16 millimeter, is it actually 16 millimeter? If a bag of cement is said to be labeled 50 kilograms, is it actually 50 kilograms? On and on and on. Don't you have enough other duties to do rather than worrying about a highly specialized function, which the law is now, as a bill, assigning specifically to a commission that has been created to regulate the industry?
Yes, we are not actually clamoring for additional jobs. We have them. Of course, I won't take it. I won't dispute that. But the petroleum industry, the petroleum department also has a number of things to look at in that sector. You understand? I don't know why. I don't know. I'm yet to be convinced why the weight and measures activities are offensive to the performance of the commission. Why are they running away from somebody coming to... Look, you cannot monopolize such a sector and say that you are the only guru in it. You must allow for the check and balance in the country. We are all Nigerians and we have equal right to participate in everything.
It's just a provision made, you know, in this PIB.
Yes.
It's yet to be practicalized.
Yes.
But remember that they've also created a commission and authority, which will as well be saddled with some responsibilities, including perhaps weights and measures.
Yes.
We never can tell for now until we begin to see the implementation of this bill. That is, if the president assents to it.
But it's better for us to protect it before the implementation, and where you might come and regret what we are doing. That's why we are actually highlighting these ills.
All right.
We cannot stop it if the government so wish to do it.
Let's take that as one of the contentious issues. I'll bring in Professor Yemi Oke here. Professor Yemi Oke, please be more specific, because in your opening comments, the entire passage of that bill did not go down well with you in your own perspective, but we'd like you to be more specific on some of the items of this bill that you feel are offensive, so that we can begin to understand your own perspective of certain aspects of the bill that we feel not properly captured.
I'm having difficulty hearing you because of the background noise interfering.
All right, let's come back to the studio. Of course, we have lost the signals there to Yemi Oke, so let's get back to the studio. Hope that our engineers will do something to get us back on track. All right, we've had your initial comment, which has to do with the weights and measures of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. But let's go to other aspects now, so that we can understand your own perspective of this bill properly. Talk about the regulatory arrangements that have been captured in that bill. NNPC is going to be unbundled, and then we'll have this commission and, of course, the authority, which are going to be regulatory bodies. So what's your thinking about that?
Well, that's what I even started with. I said not all the sections of the bill is offensive. There are some of the sections, that, like the one you quote, that we can applaud and say, yes, we have reached a certain level. Number one, it will reduce the expenses of maintaining such equipment like we have now, where we have various bodies like DPR, PPRA, this what have you. We are going to reduce it and bring it to a little bit manageable size of the operations at that level. But what I'm saying is this: you cannot take when you talk about speciality, you have to leave it to those experts that have been trained particularly to do that job. Why we are really looking at it is that the education, the qualification to monitor the accuracy of equipment, that's all we are talking about. You are going to use equipment to measure these commodities for trade purpose. What we are saying is that allow those who are trained within and outside the country using the government resources to actually come and dispense with this quality and tell you that this is correct. If we do that, there are so many implications in this. You understand? That a loss of revenue I mentioned earlier, using unverified weighing or measuring equipment. This we have seen in several times, several occasions.
Let me ask you this question, Engineer Sada. Over the years, when there were reports, speculations, and even allegations that Nigeria did not know the quantity of crude oil it was producing or the quantity of crude oil it was exporting, which agency of government debunked those speculations and claims and allegations?
Well, in the previous years, I was aware of such notions and allegations, of course, and the rest. But I am telling you that from 2014, when Weights and Measures Department of the Federal Ministry of Industry Trade and fully mobilized to the terminal, such issues have been addressed and are being addressed regularly. Because why we are saying, even when the report was coming out, at that time, there was no checks and balance that supposed to have been done by the Weights and Measures. Nobody is actually bothering about how the measuring equipment in those terminals are really being handled.
Well, I don't know. Well, again, I think it will be for the Department of Petroleum Resources, which is the industry SAR, as still is before the PIB becomes an act, to respond to that. Because what I do know is that the DPR was the government agency that rebutted those claims and allegations, not Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, or the Weights and Measures Department of that ministry. And then secondly, it was also NTA. That is the Extractive Industrial Transparency Initiative.
Actually brought it.
Yes, that were doing that. But now it's like, I'm sure Kieran will have the opportunity of probably dealing with these issues to see, is this just a quest for territorial acquisition? To say, no, this is something that we have been doing, so let us continue to do it.
Well, the PIB has come actually to touch on all that, because in the past we have had discrepancies when it comes to the amount of oil that leaves this country. We also had issues with what is even produced on a daily basis. So for now, we are being joined by another guest, Engineer Emeka Ene, former chairman, Petroleum Technology Association and Chief Executive Officer, Oil Data Energy Group, Port Harcourt. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning and thanks for having me.
Well, I want to believe that you've been listening in to the conversation we've had so far on the PIB. And of course, it's a common knowledge now that the bill has been passed by the two chambers of the National Assembly, and we're looking at matters arising as a result of that passage. So let's get your own perspective on the contents of the bill and how the contents will go a long way in changing the course of history of petroleum industry business in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I think that the passing of the bill is a very positive development for the industry. I mean, no bill is perfect. Everybody understands that. We don't live in a perfect environment. And there's a complex combination of factors and interests, of course, that drive into the final document. But from an industry perspective, passing the PIB allows us to have a direction, allows us to even understand the rules of the game. Remember that the PIB replaces like 10 different acts and bills and regulations, and all of these conflicting regulations now have a consolidated view and a direction. And I think in that respect, having a bill that reflects today's realities is very, very important. we also need to recognize that we live in very interesting times. I mean, we are in the middle of a COVID pandemic, and the industry, not just the industry, but the global economy there's been a shift, and that shift is reflecting having a great collateral impact on the energy mix, in which oil and gas may actually be threatened over the next decade or so. So it was important to have the rules of the game clearly spelled out at this point in time, particularly when it comes to defining and separating the regulatory part of it, right? Creating the transparency and creating a direction in which the industry needed to go. We need to also understand that in the last, even in 2020, if you look at the foreign direct investment that flowed into Nigeria, almost $10 billion, the oil industry got only 0.5% of that, $50 million, in terms of foreign direct investment in 2020. And if you go back 5 years, so 2015 to 2019, it's a bad situation where Nigeria is the largest producer of oil, and yet you find that only 4% of foreign direct investment was attracted in the whole of Africa into Nigeria. So the PIB allows us to push the industry forward at a time when there's a lot of uncertainty, not just in the energy sector, but in the global economy as a whole.
Well, Chrisley, now that we have you online, let us get your own view on the contentious issues in that PIB. There are, fiscal allocation. We also have 30% allocation to the host communities and other issues that you may find, not really, close to what Nigerians expect of the PIB.
Yeah. Okay. Without going into specifics, the truth is that we all recognize that host communities have had there's been a very negative impact on the environment, on the development of infrastructure around host communities, many of whom are located in very difficult terrain. It is very difficult to fully appreciate this unless you go into the Niger Delta and see the kind of environmental degradation that has taken place over time. These are essentially fishing communities that have stopped fishing for all intents and purposes because the environment no longer can sustain that. So there's a consensus that there needed to have been a direct intervention in terms of linking the production and the production activity that takes place in the community to the benefits that accrue to that community. There's no doubt about that. Now, how do you establish the quantum of those benefits? That becomes not an economic issue per se, probably a political issue. And in the kind of environment that we live in, the kind of country that we have, there has to be give and take, compromise reached. But what I think is more important is that there is now a recognition and there is a framework in which you can build on that. There are other funds, the Environmental Remediation Fund and exploration, all these things will come together. What is more important is the implementation. Now, the law places the onus or the burden on the community to have to make sure that oil production continues unhindered. It remains to be seen how this will be implemented because most of the interruptions in oil production come from pipeline vandalization, which may not take place within that particular community, probably a transit community or impacted community. So it's going to be interesting to see how that is interpreted. But I see it less as a controversy, but I see it more as a step in the right direction. Remember, we started from a zero-sum game, and we now have some kind of recognition that we need to implement something in this regard. What is more important is how is it going to be implemented, and it's not as easy as what you see within the confines of the Act itself. We need to see what happens in terms of the regulations, in terms of the implementation of the trust funds, in terms of defining the boundaries on which an impacted community, which is a host community, or the word used in the Act or the bill is settlers or settlers. So how do you define that? All those things probably are going to count more than the actual quantum of percentages that are accrued towards the host community fund.
All right, Engineer, thank you very much. We'll come back to you for further insights into other relevant aspects of the PIB. But let's also at this time welcome His Royal Majesty Felix Enene Otuwarikpo. His Royal Majesty Felix Enene Otuwarikpo is of Upata Kingdom in Ahada East local government area of Rivers State. Your Royal Majesty, we are right on the issue of host community and the provision for it in the PIB, and that's an issue that Engineer was talking about a while ago. What we saw initially was 3% allocation of the operating expenses of oil companies provided for in the Senate version and 5% of operating expenses in the House version, but ultimately the House came down to 3%. So we now have, as it were, a harmonized version of 3%. But there's been a lot of furore from Niger Delta stakeholders that this amount isn't enough. What is the grounds really, considering some of the explanations already provided by Engineer Nen?
About 20 years or thereabouts. And my people, the people of the Niger Delta, have been consistent on arguing that the issue of allocation of percentages is not really necessary at this point of our democracy and development in Nigeria. If we are practicing federalism, as it were, then we should practice federalism in the true sense of it. What obtains in other countries where petroleum products are mined should equally apply to Nigeria. We are expecting that the National Assembly should look at the possibility of allowing the communities to mine these petroleum products and pay tax to the government. But that has been discussed and exhausted, and we are now at a stage of getting the presidential assets for implementation of the bill that has just been passed. As a matter of fact, we expect Mr. President to harvest the ideas that have been canvassed by all sectors of the Nigerian society. The stakeholders have raised issues, especially on the percentages allocated to communities, percentages allocated to frontier exploration and all that. We are aware, as members of the communities in the Niger Delta, that these percentages were allocated based on party leanings, ideological leanings, tribal and religious sentiments were deployed to arriving at these percentages. But the president is a president of the nation. He's father to all. We will expect him to harvest this conversation and come up with a holistic, percentage that will not worsen the situation in the Niger Delta. We are hoping that he will play the father role he has been playing over time. We are confident that Mr. President will address the grievances of the Niger Delta and come up with possibly, request the National Assembly. He has the power to request the National Assembly to review what they have done, and we are expecting that a little shift will be, allowed by Mr. President.
Royal Majesty, you have really taken us to another, dimension, which of course is not part of this conversation. The issue of practicing true federalism is not part of our show this morning. Now, the PIB has been passed by the National Assembly, and we're talking about provision made for the host communities so that they can benefit from this bill. This is a well-crafted allocation, if you ask me, based on the fact that this bill has been in the National Assembly for quite some time. And what we're concerned about this morning is if you are not satisfied with the 3%, what percentage would you think that will be allocated to the host communities that will make sense? Because if you insist on the host communities mining oil and what have you, that's another matter altogether that we may not be able to accommodate this morning in our conversation.
Well, as a matter of fact, if you look at what has been passed holistically, the 3% is not adequate to address the problem of the Niger Delta. It's completely inadequate. What stops the Harmonization Committee to reverse the 30% for the frontier exploration to developing the host communities? 3%, in fact, we are humans. 3% is not adequate. I believe those members of the committee of the National Assembly, the Joint Committee, never traveled to the Niger Delta to look at what is on ground before arriving at 3%. And even if they did, I was home, and most of my brother kings were home. None of them came to our communities to assess what was on ground before arriving at 3%. If they did, they will not canvass for 3%. And so we are arguing that Mr. President should overrule the National Assembly and review the 3% upward for the interest not only of the Niger Delta, but of the Nigerian states. The bill is envisaging a shift from 37 billion metric tons of this in a year to about 40 billion. And so if we are to move from 37 to 40 billion, we expect stability in the Niger Delta. And my people are arguing that 3% is not feasible for the development of the Niger Delta. And like my colleague here said, is beyond even allocating 3%. What are the mechanisms for implementation of the Community Trust Fund that has been envisaged by the bill? We have to equally look at the implementation. We are aware of what is happening in the Niger Delta Development Commission that has not yielded any dividend to our people. And so we are believing that Mr. President will overrule the National Assembly and improve on what has been passed to allow for stability in the Niger Delta.
All right. Your Royal Majesty, thank you very much for your comments. Let me very politely point out to Your Majesty, and indeed to some of our viewers who may not know, that under our current democratic and constitutional dispensation, the President of the Federal Republic cannot overrule the National Assembly, which has transmitted a bill to him for his assent. What he can do is to decline his assent. And he may so decline by stating his reasons and retransmitting to the National Assembly his comments and his refusal to assent to the bill. And the National Assembly then goes back to work on it, if it wants to work on it, or the National Assembly may then override the President's veto to say, look, I'm not assenting to this bill. It is not for the President, one more time, to say that National Assembly, you provided 3%, now I'm taking it to 10% or to 3.5%. That would be a nullity. So that bill, of course, will not become an act of the National Assembly. That's one point. Second point, Your Majesty, I would like you to address, and this has also come up in the course of various conversations, that we're not looking at absolute numbers. You said 30% for frontier exploration. That is said to come from profit oil accruing to NNPC Limited, as it would then be when the bill becomes fully an act. 30% of profit oil to NNPC. Now, or from NNPC. Now, 3% is from operating expenses of oil companies. And some persons are arguing that, well, I mean, since you also have other provisions, the PIB has not repealed the NDDC Act, neither has it, of course, purported to amend the constitutional provision relating to 13% derivation. What are your thoughts on this, Your Majesty?
The operating profits of the oil companies that we are looking at and assigning the 3%. Like I said earlier, the 3% that will eventually go to the community trust fund if the bill has been assented to by Mr. President. The major factor is the mechanisms that will be put in place to implementing and ensuring that whatever is allocated actually, impact positively on the communities. If that happens, of course, we'll eventually have a situation where, there will be peace in the communities. The communities will, see oil exploration as part of, synergy, that will develop both the community and the government. And so the communities have no problem with all those issues that have been raised, but we are particular about the method of implementation. And so we expect that if the bill is eventually assented to, the government should equally, energize those commissions, the various commissions and the statutory bodies that we put in place to ensure over time, these complaints that are coming out from these communities, are eventually taken care of and become a thing of the past, so that at least Nigeria should move forward, and investors should have confidence in coming to our environment, to invest.
Thank you, Your Majesty. If time allows it, we'll come back to you. But now let's introduce our other guest, who is the spokesperson, House of Representatives. That's Honorable Benjamin Kalu. He's joining us via Zoom. Honorable Kalu, good morning and welcome. All right, we seem to be having difficulty. Okay, yes, he's back. Honorable Kalu, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And Nigerians, thank you for tuning in.
All right, let's get your opening comment on the issue of the successful passage of the PIB by the two chambers of the National Assembly. The bill has also been forwarded to the President for his assent. Now, there are contentious issues being raised at different quarters with respect to provisions of that bill. Let's get your take on what actually transpired in terms of deliberation by the National Assembly to come up with the bill that it has now passed, which is, of course, raising some issues at different quarters.
The petroleum industry, as we have it, has been operating with an obsolete law. And with the challenges that we have at the moment globally, which you could mention a few of them, with the COVID that gave birth to strongest recession since 1929, to ever cheaper energy storage, to ever cheaper renewable solar costs as low as 2 to 6 cents per kilowatts. When you consider the impact of hydropower, biomass, geothermal, and all the rest of them. When you consider the impact of climate change, consider green hydrogen, you find out that something needed to be done for us to be able to match the right steps towards embracing energy transmission. That is leaving the fossil fuel and entering into renewable energy. And a window has been given that the peak demand for this product will only be for about 10 to 20 years. And it's not only Nigeria that is looking at adjusting few things to be able to meet up with these new challenges in the sector. So a large number of countries are now putting new acreages on the market due to looming threats. Oil demand, uncertainty, changing investment decisions and dynamics. And COVID did not help at all. It heightened the competition, especially for investing capital. So, and most countries are accelerating their fiscal and regulatory reforms necessary to attract investment. Nigeria should not be left out. So the objective of this bill, which is Petroleum Industry Bill 2020, was directed at promoting economic growth through increased oil and gas production, and promote frontier exploration, establish an effective acreage management, like I just mentioned, create transparency and non-confidentiality, which has hindered Nigerians from knowing a lot of that is happening in the field, and also transform NNPC, create an effective midstream and downstream licensing system, and a whole lot. And we have peculiar challenges in our country, especially when it comes to fiscal issues, tax burden, and high costs. And it has a consequential impact on the industry. When you look at the fiscal issues, you'll be seeing fiscal instability, unstructured, unsustainable funding, mechanism for frontier exploration. When you look at tax burden, you'll be looking at the CIT, which is the company income tax, which was at 30%, NDDC 3% burden, the TET 2%, the NES 0.12%, the PPT 85%, the VAT 7.5%, the NCD 1%, the 0.075% FOB, weight and measured, several states and local government tax levies, and all the rest of them. This is impacting on the industry, and the high cost due to fiscal system abuse. You also have difficult operating environment, overlapping and ineffective governance framework, fiscal incentives not focused on output. And what did that do to the industry? It brought defilement of core investment, lack of focus on midstream, inadequate funding for JV operations, lack of funding for decommissioning and abandonment, environmental remediation, insignificant direct social and economic benefits to host communities that the chief there have been talking about, and divestment by major industries. Like somebody mentioned, the line has been epileptic, but I had somebody mentioning that we only got a little percentage of investment that have been made in the sector around this period. Now, you see, what do we seek to achieve? We are looking at to remove uncertainty due to the protracted norm overhaul of this legal framework on governance and fiscal environment. And what do we intend to achieve, establish, right? We intend to establish good governance, competence, global best practices, ease of doing business. And while doing that, we are focusing on early revenue for government. We are focusing on predictability. We are focusing on simplicity of administration, responsiveness, best practices, sustainability, role clarity, transparency. And the bill, when you look at the bill, you'll be seeing that it is broken mainly when it comes to governance structure. With regards to policy and regulation, you'll be looking at administration. We are targeting administration. We targeted administration. We targeted also governance. And also the host community development, which is a major interest for most of the people from my area. I'm from the Niger Delta as well. But it should be mentioned that on the acreage management competitive bid process is going to be, seen in this piece of bill when the president gives assent. You'll be seeing the commissioning and environmental remediation fund. You'll be seeing the right. You'll be seeing the.
Okay. Honorable Benjamin Kalu, looks like your bandwidth is dropping or otherwise unstable. We hope to return to you later on in the course of the conversation. And the other gentleman, Engineer Sada, with us here in the Abuja studios, Royal Majesty of Upata Kingdom, and Engineer Ene in the Port Harcourt Network Center. Gentlemen, we're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation. All right, you're welcome back, and you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on NTA's network service. Let's return to Port Harcourt, where we still have His Royal Majesty of Upata Kingdom and Engineer Emeka Ene. My question is going to Engineer Emeka Ene. Engineer Emeka Ene, let's take a look at the regulatory aspect of the PIB as passed. As it were, we have a double-decker regulatory framework, a commission and an authority. What's your view on that? Is it necessary? Is it an overkill? Plus, in management of acreage, we understand that some of the discretionary powers that industry players or investors often found worrisome have now been drastically reduced with regard to the powers exercisable by the Minister of Petroleum.
Yeah, okay, so it's first, the whole idea of a double-decker thing is, in terms of the regulatory environment or structure, is less of a challenge. And more of the challenge is to go to what I would regard to be an object-driven policy, as opposed to a rules-based policy. Now, if you contrast Nigeria with a country like Norway, in terms of how the industry evolved over time, remember, Norway at some point was doing 2.5 million barrels per day. Nigeria, 2.1. So you can say that the kind of similar volumes in a way. But Norway has managed their industry better because they had their whole regulatory structure was simple and predictable and consistent over time. That's just the point. So they just had a Petroleum Directorate, and that was it. In the case of Nigeria, I think part of the challenge is clarity and also policy-driven in terms of the objectives of the industry. So gas, midstream, and downstream petroleum production has been an issue for the large population, and the death of gas infrastructure has made it essential that we take our eyes away from the upstream oil per se and begin to pay more attention to the gas. So from that philosophical approach, you can argue that separating the regulator into a focus on mid and downstream versus upstream may be a step in the right direction. However, we have not been too efficient in implementing policy. That's the truth. We have weak institutions. And so therefore, there will be some level of overlap, and therefore a bit of I won't call it double dipping, that is inevitable. But I think we need to stay on the objective, which is to develop the mid and downstream sector and to have clarity of regulations, because the gas business and the downstream business is different from the upstream business in terms of scope, in terms of the importance of safety, and therefore I think that with what is being proposed, if implementation is followed through, it will lead to a desired outcome. So that's my perspective. In terms of the second question, maybe I'll stop here and allow you to develop the second question. Yeah.
Curious, I'm sorry. I just is asking me to recast my second question. That some of the provisions in the PIB have now reduced the discretionary powers of the Minister of Petroleum with regard to management of acreage, allotment of acreage, and all other critical issues that investors sometimes found worrisome because the powers were too extensive and therefore sometimes unpredictable.
Well, the thing is that you can argue that policy is political rather than economic in terms of implementation. That is just the truth. And in the Nigerian situation, the political scenario is something straight out of an action movie or a fiction novel. It's a real life complex environment. And so from an investor point of view, clarity is important, because if somebody is bringing in his money today to realize the gains over a 10 or even a 20-year period, you want to have some level of predictability to be able to attract and sustain the investment required to fully develop a field or a block, as the case may be. So if you look at what it takes to consistently grow the oil industry, we're talking about policies that will lead to institutions, implemented by institutions, around which they will work with a regulatory framework, right? And then, of course, a fiscal regime that is consistent over time. So I think that the message that's being sent is that Nigeria is ready for business, that our policies need to be a bit more transparent, and that even where you have some level of discretion, the discretion is based on data, on facts, or requires some level of justification, because discretion in itself is not wrong if it is based on facts or based on the best possible decision in the interest of the Nigerian state. So in that regard, I would say that the balance that has been struck is a balance in the positive direction. Remember that today the oil and gas business is more competitive, and money goes after the path of least resistance. Money is conservative. And so therefore, if we are going to keep attracting investments into Nigeria over the next decade, at a time when funds for fossil fuel investment they are probably a little bit in short supply, then we need to have and we need to present a transparent picture. I think that's very, very important. Very important. And I think this is something that is driving that decision. There's a scripture that says, flee from all appearance of evil. It doesn't necessarily say flee from evil. It says there needs to be an appearance. If there's an appearance of evil, flee from it. So in other words, perception can many times be reality. And so the message that's being sent is that there's a level of transparency from beginning of the process to the end in terms of delivery of investment.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Professor Yemi Oke here. Professor Oke, we would like you also to talk on this issue of the Upstream Regulatory Commission, which the PIB recommended, as well as the Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority. These are creations of the PIB. You had earlier told us that the PIB will not take us to promised land. Having listened to other guests, are you changing your mind on that? Are there some specifics that you may ponder on that will see the PIB perhaps as a bill that will help to sanitize the petroleum industry in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for the very good question you have asked me. One, talking about the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission, the bill gives the commission extensive powers, quite extensive. But I'm kind of not in agreement with the fact that if you look at Section 4, it gives the commission extensive technical regulatory functions. Then it goes to 8. It also gives the commission commercial functions. And sector realities will show clearly that you're going to have regulatory overlaps if you are mixing technical regulations with commercial and other functions. I'm not satisfied that the commission now is to perform certain commercial or business functions, which shouldn't be its mandate. At best, to focus almost exclusively on effective technical governance. the sector. We're also talking about the Nigerian midstream and downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, which is described as the authority. I see in the proposed bill, though not law yet, I also see the likelihood of overlaps between the functions of the commission and that of the authority. A glance through the petroleum industry bill as currently structured will give an impression of regulatory surplusage. That's not what we need at this stage. I've always said that we can have technical specific provisions in the Act. Then other details could be by way of regulations. Those are flexible means of keeping the sector going. We can't possibly legislate the entirety of industry needs in a piece of instrument. If you look at the provision of the petroleum industry, it's needlessly detailed. And the risk is you probably will not be able to do things with the kind of flexibility that the industry requires. At every stage, you are looking for one approval, one license. It's too detailed for the kind of 21st century petroleum sector that we intend to run. And by the way, it's regulating several things. Simultaneously regulating the upstream, the midstream, the downstream, the gas, and allied sector. And sector players might have their hands tied because of inherent bureaucracies that are seen in the law. And that might not make for a fluid, effective, smooth operationalization of the law. In the 21st century, when decisions would need to be taken urgently, swiftly, and you are requiring them to get one license, one approval, one consent, or what have you. So I see specifically that the provisions of the PIB relating to the functions and duties of Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission and Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, those are needlessly detailed. It's best to give them general powers with specific clauses and give the head of the agency power to make regulation, which should supplement and respond to industry needs on case-by-case basis. But as I said, a law will still depend on how we operationalize it. The provisions will still need to be tested by us, lawyers, technical persons, industry players. Some of those provisions will be interpreted. Some will be interpreted correctly, some wrongly, because perhaps we'll have to rule on some of them. Then with time, it will develop. The good thing about it is that we can start to note those that are not practicable or those that are efficient. And subsequently, the bill, when it becomes an act, may be amended and supplemented by flexible, sustainable regulations from time to time. I would rather the view of regulatory approaches as against legislative approaches, because it's taken us almost 20 years to have the act, whereas if you give general powers, then the headship of the agency may roll out regulations to get things done smoothly without having to plug progress in the sector.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Yemi, for your contribution. Let's bring in one more time Honorable Benjamin Kalu, who is still with us as the spokesperson of the House of Reps. Honorable Kalu, tell us, what is the status of the bill right now? Is it still awaiting harmonization between the two chambers, that's to say the Senate and the House? I'm asking because earlier on, the information we had was that there were discrepancies. I understand Benjamin Kalu, we can't immediately get across to him. I was going to ask this. Just one area that we needed to clarify. I mean, Kieran, because apart from the 3%, 5% for host communities, which the House then climbed down to 3% and they agreed, there was also a critical aspect relating to the status of existing agencies, namely the Petroleum Equalization Fund and the PPPRA. And the version that was
DPR as well.
Well, DPR is going to transform into the commission and part of the authority. That's the two-decker regulatory framework. But this one, PPPRA and PEA, Petroleum Equalization Fund, the Senate version said that those two agencies should be scrapped immediately upon the takeoff of the act itself. In other words, when the president signs it into law, as a commencement date, those two agencies are scrapped. But the House, in its version, prescribed a gradualist transition for the PEA, that there will be a transition period to phase out the Petroleum Equalization Fund, probably over 6 months or a couple of years. I don't know whether that has been retained.
This says 6 months after the law must have been passed.
Yes, so that's what I wanted to find out, because if the House retained that provision in their own bill as passed, then that will require reconciliation with
the harmonization has taken place. That's what has been established.
Okay, so then what has happened to those two divergent positions? Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify.
We've lost the contact with Carlo, otherwise he would have given us the correct status of the bill at the moment. As we round off this edition of the program gradually, let's get back to His Royal Majesty. His Royal Majesty, you have listened to other guests and also raised the concerns about the 3% allocation to host communities. Now that it has been harmonized and 3% taken, how would your people respond to that? I know you have been agitating that that is not enough, but then you have not actually known the amount of money that will be involved in this. We would like to believe that the amount of money that will be accruable to the host communities could be enough to tackle some of the infrastructural deficits that we have in those communities. Are your people going to, at a point, say, okay, let's wait and see the implementation of this before you react? Please be brief about it.
Well, as a matter of fact, there is this perception that the Niger Delta people are always, bent on making troubles over nothing. It is not true. We were full of expectation over the passage of this petroleum industry bill. And we believe that when the bill is eventually signed into law, the flexibility that will be enshrined into the act will ensure that there will be robust relationship between oil exploration multinational companies and our people. We expect a new playing field where our people, the multinationals and the government relate more effectively. We believe that this is a very golden opportunity to develop our communities and make life more meaningful. The bill, incidentally, equally explains issues concerning environmental degradation and cleansing of the environment and all those factors. And so we are expecting that when it is eventually signed into law, that most of these provisions in the PIB will be implemented to the letter. If that is done, our people will assure the government of peace and will also cooperate effectively with all stakeholders to ensure that businesses are done and to also create an environment for further investments in the Niger Delta. All what we are saying is that our people are tired of being shortchanged by the Nigerian government, and we will not continue to play second-class citizens in our own country. And so we expect that whatever provisions, whether it's 3% or whatever percent, it should not just be a percentage on paper. It should be a percentage that should be implementable. And if that is done, Nigeria will see a different Niger Delta that will be very, proactive, very promising, very cooperative with the Nigerian government and the Nigerian people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Your Royal Majesty. I wanted the engineer NA to just speak briefly to this for a few seconds, if you may. In the past, we used to hear that investments in the downstream sector, particularly in refining, those investments were held up because of the poor regulatory framework or absence of regulatory framework, namely total deregulation. Is there anything in the PIB that gives some hope that now, yes, we will see more investment in the downstream sector, especially with refining, which has actually bled foreign reserves on account of importation?
Okay, I think within the regulatory framework, there is an opportunity. And the opportunity is the creation of a sector-specific authority looking at downstream and midstream matters. I think that's important. I know people tend to complain about the fact that because we have more like a rent-seeking economy, the tendency is to have multiplicity of tariffs and penalties. But separating the two has, I think, created the basis for a real market to emerge. What I mean a market, that's a market-driven downstream and midstream. The fact that the midstream complements the downstream in many ways because of the potential for gas economy, gas-driven economy. So there's some level of complements between the two of them. Now, in terms of refining, what has happened with the modular refining business, where operators have invested in modular refining, regional refining, I want to call that, that again would be strengthened by the regulatory framework. So I think what the PIB brings is modularizing, if I permit me to use that word, modularizing the way the industry is managed in such a way that we match the demand to the solution. But key is that without strong institutions, implementing policies or a regulatory framework is very difficult. And so we expect that if this is going to work, then the regulatory framework needs to be strengthened with the institutions that you have created over time. So we don't have policy flip-flops that just goes from government to government and changes what is already laid down in the PIB.
Engineer, and thank you so much for your contribution. Let's get briefly to Engineer Sidi Sada. Just in a few seconds, give us your final thoughts on this matter.
Well, my final thought is that I just want to call on Nigerians and the government and policy makers to realize and actually appreciate the importance of metrology in every sector of economy. And this metrology, when we talk about metrology, it's a straight line. It is a traceable actions that leads to the international measuring system, which Nigeria cannot be in isolation. That's what we have been saying, that we are not talking about transparency yet in terms of the new commission, but there is what we call metrology system, which must be applied. If you remember in 2012, 2016, for the importance of the metrology.
But the PIB has not scrapped metrology.
Exactly. It has, because the metrology is 3 components. You cannot do without one.
All right.
We are talking about legal metrology, scientific, and industrial.
We really have to wait for this PIB to be implemented, because I consider that some complexities in this bill that tends to bring about some confusion in some quarters, because there's no way PIB will neglect metrology.
There is no way, and you cannot take metrology hub and.
So we just call it today, sir. We'll thank you indeed, for your contribution and bringing in this issue of metrology, which is very essential in any business setting. Engineer Mohammed Sidi Sada, former Director of Legal Metrology, Federal Ministry of Trade and Industry, Trade and Investments. Thank you so much. Engineer Emeka Ene, former Chairman, Petroleum Technology Association and Chief Executive Officer, Oil Data Energy. We also appreciate you for your contribution this morning. His Royal Majesty Felix Otoaribo of Opata Kingdom, we also thank you. Well, we may share in some of your sentiments, but of course, yes, we are in government. We have to, of course, wait and see how this PIB will be implemented. Again, via Zoom, we have the Professor of Energy, Law, University of Lagos, Professor Yemi Oke, and we also had the privilege this morning of having the spokesperson of the House of Representatives in the person of Honorable Benjamin Kalu. We thank you all for your contribution this morning to Good Morning Nigeria.
See you again tomorrow. I'm Kingsley Osadalo.
And I'm Kyrian. Goodbye for now.